Hello and welcome back to the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm your host, Dan Nash, and I'm joined by my beautiful co-host, Owain. He's laughing at me now. Today we're talking about how to optimize your warm-up and looking at the research, what the athletes are doing, and how can you get the most out of your warm-up to make sure you can perform in whatever distance you're about to race. And I'm going to throw it out there. I think most people are warming up wrong. Maybe that's a title, a headline grabber, but I think most people aren't getting it quite right. Obviously, they're a lot of people are, but I think what the elites are doing isn't necessarily what's following through to those people who are haven't got sports scientists, physiology support. Coaches are very up to date with the research. So that's what we want to dive into a bit more today. Share what research is saying, share what we know that some of the elite athletes are doing, and hopefully get you guys running faster with just some easy wins you can get from your warm-up. So I think the most important, I think the thing that's most missing is that intensity piece. So I think I'm going to hand it over to Owain now to tell an anecdote of what sort of got me thinking about we should do this as a podcast.
Yeah. Hey. Morning. So I think the reason that this has come up, and it's something that an anecdote I've said to Dan before, a couple of times. A Cardiff 5K. It would have been 2023. Would have been last year, I think.
Last year.
Last year Cardiff 5K. Warming up, and for anyone that knows Cardiff 5K, everyone warms up along the route, and people, clubs are sort of set up at the few pubs along the route, and I was doing some stretches where my club was set up, and Dan runs past, and he's absolutely flying. Everyone else is shuffling along, jogging, and Dan's working hard. You can see from Dan's sort of the speed he's going, and his facial expression, he's working hard. And someone says to me, "Oh, why is Dan running so hard? He's about to race." And I sort of knew what was going on from some of this research, but Dan goes flying past, and then a few minutes later he comes back and he's still going. So he's done 3-4, I don't know how much it would have been that day.
I've just looked up now. I did 4 minutes. 5:03 a mile, 3:08 or 8K. So hope that wasn't looking too horrendous, but but that's not easy, especially in a warm up. I was working.
Yeah, and everyone else is either really shuffling, just doing the bare minimum. That sort of idea of get some. The classic. You've done someone's done a leader in running fitness course, and they're doing their ramp warm up. Whatever the RAMP acronym stands for. Was it raise,
activate, mobilize, potentiate?
Yeah. I'm sure some influencers that have done their LERF course will know what that means. This was completely different. Everyone else is shuffling and then doing some strides, and Dan's doing a fair chunk of work beforehand. And I just happen to have a couple of people say to me, "Oh, what's Dan doing?" And I explained it as much as I felt was worthwhile before a 5K race, when no one's really paying attention anyway. But it's sort of been on our minds since, that actually there's some decent quality work in terms of warm-ups, and like Dan said, what elite runners are doing is potentially a bit different to what amateur runners and club runners are doing, and I mean we'll mention it from the research. There is some almost free performance on offer from just a slight change to your warm-up, and it's something you can do not just at races but in sessions as well. And I think it's something that you'd actually feel the effect in sessions when we come to talking about it as well.
And I think I guess in contrast to what I did there was I did some easy running. I did 4 minutes. I wouldn't hang on 4 minutes, but 4 minutes, pretty hard intensity, about my LT2, my threshold, lactate turn point, whatever you want to call it, a bit of jogging, and then some strides. And I guess I'd contrast that to what most people do, which is do 10 or so minutes of jogging, They might do a few drills, some high knees, some, A skips, B skips, whatever. And then they might do, a few 5-10 second sprints. Like people aren't doing strides, whatever that means. They're sprinting up there and just walking back. Controlled fast running, and then they're ready to go. And one of the things that researchers seems to suggest is that actually that's missing one key step, which is basically when I'm going to go into the physiology now and then hopefully explain how the warm-up is effective. But basically when we're starting a 5K, a 10K, whatever race it is, our heart rate, our oxygen consumption can't just jump to that level immediately. Now you'll see that if you're measuring your heart rate. It's gonna go up very quickly and then plateau off. But it's not just jumping up, like an analog signal. There's a gap between where it takes time for your oxygen levels, your heart rate to get up to where it needs to meet the demands of that aerobically. And when you can't get that, when you in that bit, that speed, where that initial bit where you're not where oxygen levels aren't meeting demands of what your muscles need, you still need that energy. So that energy comes from anaerobic metabolism, so glycolysis and the phosphocreatine system, which is that's fine, but that system is limited, and you can think of it like a battery. So if you use it at the start of the race to get you up to speed, then you've got less of it to use at the back end of the race, when actually you're pretty much at your VO2 max, and you want to use every fuel source you can, so you can use your anaerobic capacity on top of your VO2 max. So this led people to think, actually, how can we get our aerobic system up as quickly as we can? So how can we get our heart rate up effectively? You can think of heart rate and oxygen consumption as pretty much one-to-one. They're not always, but when we're looking at an easy way to get a really good idea without looking at it in the lab, is to just look at your heart rate. And you want to get your heart rate up as soon as you can. And the idea of these researchers was, how can we go about doing that? And I guess this is a technical term. This is the VO2 kinetics. So looking at actually what is the rate of how quickly we can turn on our oxygen consumption and get it up to those levels. And obviously the faster the better, because that means like I said, we can use our anaerobic capacity later on in the race. And actually what happens is, you tend to just, if you're running an even paced race, you'll just eke it out of the course of a race, because you're obviously you can, especially if you're talking about a 5K, a 3K, then you're running, you're going to be at VO2 max very quickly, and then you're going to be using your anaerobic metabolism alongside that at the same time. Do you want to talk a bit about VO2 kinetics?
Yeah, I think when researching this episode, I think actually that's been the hardest thing to get around, is just explaining it in podcast form. I think this might be one where, if you check our Twitter in the show notes, we'll put a graph in there just so you can understand what we're saying. But if you imagine, I think
I was just mumbling then, doing a really bad job of trying to say the thing in multiple different ways. But yeah, I think it's one of those ones where visually you go, that makes sense. But I think it is not the easiest to convey over audio.
If you anyone that's been in the lab will have seen this, but if you have a graph where along the bottom is time, and then along the y-axis is the VO2 response or heart rate, like Dan said, heart rate sort of will match anyway. When you start exercising, the VO2, which is the oxygen uptake of your body, or oxygen needed for exercise, is going to increase. But like Dan said, it's not just immediately at the level required for that bout of exercise. It takes a bit of time to get up to that level. And the area above that sort of rising area is an energy deficit. Like, your body needs to produce that amount of energy to power that work. And oxygen, until it reaches, it won't quite be a plateau if you're doing a 5K, but until it reaches a semi-steady-ish state, it will, like Dan said, the energy will be coming from other energy sources which you want later in the race. So that is VO2 kinetics is sort of a mathematical way of quantifying that response. And this the VO2 kinetic response to exercise. I think from memory, it's sort of found by accident, where some research was happening where they were just doing 2 bouts of exercise sort of with a gap in the middle. And they just happened to see that the second bout, the VO2 kinetics were a lot faster because they'd done the first bout of exercise and then had a break and then come back and done the second one. There was a difference in the response. And they referred to it as priming. This was back in like 1996. And yeah, they basically found that if you did an earlier bout of exercise at a sufficient intensity, you would then have this smaller, what's called an oxygen deficit. So the amount of energy that's produced from non-oxidative sources would be less, which in a race situation is really beneficial. Like Dan said, you want that energy during the race if you pace it evenly, or if you want to do a big kick at the end, then you want that energy at the end. You don't want to be using it in the first 2 or 3 minutes. I think also another way that people will have experienced this is if you're doing a session, or if you're doing, you turn up to park run on Saturday morning and you don't really warm up properly because you're running late. You jog over to the start, have a chat with some people, and then you take off. And the first 2 or 3 minutes, you just feel absolutely awful. Or if you're doing your session, it might be the first rep or two, you're just feeling really crap, like you can't meet the intensity that you want. You're just like, what's going on? Why do I feel rubbish? And then in the session, maybe the 3rd or 4th rep, suddenly you feel fine and you can hit the intensity you wanted. That's almost the same, or is the same mechanism at play. You've now primed your body's energy systems. You're now able to use oxygen much faster to fuel that work, and you don't feel rubbish anymore. And the same in the park run, you feel rubbish for the first few minutes, and then your body sort of starts to catch up. So if you can not have that happen at the start of a race, that's free performance for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just turning on the name of the game is basically turning on your aerobic system like as quickly as you're possible, and which is going to spare your anaerobic system effectively. Like, and again, like you can use that in the the back end of a race or for a big kick or whatever. But like I was going to say, another way where you'll have seen this phenomenon like in your own data is like if you're recording heart rate and you're doing like, let's say you do like 10 by K, 6 by a mile, at sort of 10K pace-ish, you'll notice that like those first couple of reps, like often if you haven't warmed up like really, really well, or even if you've done like, you've done the classic, done some jogging and done some strides, you'll see that actually you look at that heart rate trace afterwards and you'll be feeling better on the 2nd and 3rd rep, but also you'll see that your heart rate gets much higher, much quicker on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th rep as well. And it's really pronounced. So actually heart rate will get higher, which is partly just like actually your body's warming up, your core temperature is going up, but it is also a sign that you're actually just activating your aerobic system much more. And you'll see that your heart rate shoots up much more quickly. The first rep, it will sort of gradually climb up and then sort of reach a sort of steady-ish state. Whereas by the time you get to the 2nd, 3rd rep, it's nearly going straight up, horizontal, back down again when you finish. And yeah, that seems to be really important for performance. And I think one of the key papers we want to talk about is this paper by some of the great practitioners, if there is such a thing, in physiology, which is, I think you have to help me here. Steve Ingham is the lead author. Then you've got Andy Jones is on the paper, right? This 800 meter paper. Who else was it?
Barry Fudge.
Barry Fudge, who was Mo Farah's physiologist as well. So Andy Jones was Paula Radcliffe's physiologist famously and helped out on the Breaking 2 project. Steve Ingham is a practitioner, again, did his PhD with Andy Jones, I'm pretty sure.
Just as a side tangent as well, Steve Ingham's book about being a physiologist is must read. If anyone's interested in sports science, like that book is incredible. Just talking about what it's like to be a sports scientist.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book actually, and he helped out Jess Krennis again with her aerobic development and doing some more warm up stuff. He's worked with some very top athletes. He worked with British rowing for a bit. He's done a lot of stuff. But anyway, all these the actual paper is looking at actually how to best optimize the warm up for an 800 meter race, especially like one in a championship where actually you can't. Unlike your park run where you can just warm up until the whistle goes, like obviously in the Olympics or big championship races, you're going to have a cool room. So you can do your warm up for as long as you like, and there'll be a warm up track. And then you're going to sit in a cool room for 20, 30 minutes. And then you may be able to do 1 or 2 strides before you actually start your race on the performance track, and then you're gone. So they were sort of looking at actually how can we solve this problem, and they'd done a lot of this research into VO2 kinetics. And I think the basic study was crossover design. These are very good 800 meter runners. Some of them did like a traditional warm up of jog, drills, strides. I think it was like 4 times 10 seconds, that sort of thing, like ballpark. Don't quote me on that, but that's the sort of thing they did. And the other one, they did warm up. That's a warm up jog, mobility drills. They still did the strides, but they did 200 meters at race pace. So 200 meters at 800 meter race pace, which is going to feel pretty hard, but actually notice it's a lot longer than doing 6 to 10 second strides. And they looked at that, and they looked at the lactate response to that, much bigger lactate response to the 200 meters warm up compared to just doing the strides. And the athletes are reporting feeling, oh yeah, this is quite hard actually. This is quite hard. I wouldn't normally do this. They then sat them down for 20 minutes and they did an 800 meter time trial. And I think it was about a second and a half faster doing
it's 2 to 3 seconds.
2 to 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Like over 800 meters, and if you probably, listeners probably aren't doing loads of 800 meter races, but 2 to 3 seconds is massive. Like as a percentage, like that's, what's that? So it was they're like 120 second. Well, I can't remember how good the 800 meter runners were now, but 2 to 3 seconds over 800 meters is massive. And they go, oh, well, actually, that's a very easy way to get a little bit faster. And they also looked at the oxygen uptake response to that. And those athletes who ran faster had a quicker oxygen uptake response, so quicker VO2 kinetics, and just used more oxygen over the course of a whole race as well. So their hypothesis was, but actually this high intensity warm up helped the VO2 kinetics, switched on quicker, and then actually that means that they can use that anaerobic capacity. That's fixed, but you can get more energy from your aerobic system within the same 800 meter race, so they can run faster.
This will be another one we post in the show notes, but they plotted a really nice graph of the 100 meter splits between the control and the priming group, and they're basically the same. Like they're running the same time through 400 meters, and then the priming group just takes off, and they're quicker through every 100 meter segment for the second lap. So it's the benefits coming in the second half of the race. Again, like 800 meters, like you're kicking hard at the end, aren't you? Like that's where you're maybe going to be really hitting the non-oxidative energy systems, and if you've spared them a bit early on in the race, then you have that benefit towards the end of the race. So there's a performance improvement in terms of the time, but also in terms of maybe how 800 meters run anyway. There's an even bigger improvement. You're not necessarily going backwards at the end of the race. You're able to kick. So real benefit. From that paper.
Yeah, and then I guess they're like, great, that's looking at 800 meter runners, but then a lot of this early stuff was done in cycling, and then there's been further studies, not amazing studies, but further studies that have been done looking at 5K performance, and actually it's the same mechanisms are going to take place in cycling and running. So I think actually that's quite transferable stuff. The consensus seems to be that actually, 30 seconds or 200 meters of running work great for the 800 meter runners, but actually it might be better to go a little bit longer, but not quite as intense, obviously, because 200 meters at 800 meter race pace is pretty damn hard. But like doing actually 4, 5, 6 minutes at about that threshold intensity, might be more effective. And then to me, intuitively, that makes sense, because if we want to get our aerobic system up and ready to go as quickly as we can, then we want to get our aerobic system working pretty hard in the warm up. But we don't want to do so much that we're too fatigued going into it as well. And I think that's what's people's when I talk about this to athletes, and we've implemented this sort of strategy with a lot of the triathletes I work with, because warm up for them is actually, you'd think, it's a long event, but triathlon start. The triathlon is really important because you need to get the first buoy really quickly to get a good position out of the water. So the first 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes is actually really important in a triathlon. Slight tangent. But yeah, if you want to get your aerobic system up and ready as quickly as you can, then you want to be working pretty hard, and that is going to feel hard, and people aren't going to want to. People initially go, "Oh, I'm going to be too tired for the race. I'm going to be too tired, I'll be too fatigued." But the key point is that this warm-up strategy has been shown to actually it's quite long-lasting. So you don't do this with 5 minutes. You don't finish that with 5 minutes to go to your race. You can finish it 10, 15, 20 minutes. Like some research has shown that this is still effective. Like if you do this 40 minutes before, I wouldn't recommend this. I wouldn't do it 40 minutes before, but you can still get the benefits if you do it 40 minutes before and before you start your race. So timing becomes a little bit important. And what I tend to say to people is finish that hard effort at least 10 minutes before, because that's what that's going to do is give you plenty of time to recharge that anaerobic battery, because you will have used some of that. Because by definition, like we're trying to use less of that in the race, because because when you start a high intensity bout, it gets turned on quite quickly to cover that oxygen gap, that oxygen deficit. So you are going to generate some lactate. You are going to get a bit fatigued. It's going to feel quite hard. But if you give yourself 10 minutes of time to recover, at least 10 to 15 minutes, then that works fine. Like you've got the time to restock those inorganic phosphates and, flush out any hydrogen ions. Like you'll be ready to go on the start line.
I think to your point, because I think if you try and get someone to do this, they're always going to say, I'm going to be too tired for the race. One of the earlier bits of work that you touched on, a lot of the early work was done in cyclists. So I'm sure there'll be some people, a lot of runners listening, and they'll say, that's cyclists, it doesn't matter, but it is still relevant. One of the earlier papers, again by Andy Jones, that all of the early work in this is done by some like heavy hitters in the physiology world. This is Andy Jones and Mark Burnley, so big names in sport physiology world. They did the same, priming warm-ups in cyclists, and they had the test in this was a time to exhaustion trial. So where you're thinking like, I'm going to be more tired, I'm not going to be able to finish the race as strongly. They found that the participants that did the priming exercise went 15 to 30% further in a time to exhaustion trial. So yeah, you're working a bit harder in your warm-up, but that's a significant performance increase. Obviously a 5K isn't a time to exhaustion trial, but you're still able to exercise at and longer than you were before undertaking this priming. So yeah, that like there would be an element of yes, fear of the unknown, and like, yeah, it's going to feel weird warming up. And I guess contemporarily, I'm sure loads of people are the same. I always feel rubbish during my warm-ups. Like, so you're potentially already feeling rubbish, and then you're having to do some quite hard work. It's maybe not going to feel good, but there is benefit to be had from this.
100%, yeah. And I think the research still needs to refine what exactly, what is the optimal protocol, and it is going to tend to depend a little bit upon just your natural makeup as an athlete, what you feel comfortable with, because obviously psychologically you want to feel good going into a race, but that's what I think part of it needs to be. You need to practice this in training or less important races, your park run or whatever, and go, right, actually I did better than I thought I was going to do there, or actually I didn't feel so crap in the first K, actually I felt pretty good and ready to go straight away. And on sometimes I've done it, I've gone, what, I do feel a bit tired, but actually then I actually perform really well. So actually perceptually maybe I feel a bit fatigued, but then the actual overall time is better than I'd expected for how I'd have fared otherwise. So I think it's definitely one of those of trying error. But I think in terms of a practical guide, in that specifically talking about the the VO2 kinetic block. So I think you want to get your heart rate pretty close to your threshold, or let's say 85% of your max, something like that. And I think it's actually easier to do it in something that's 4, 5, 6 minutes rather than like trying to get there in 2 minutes, because that's going to be really hard. You're gonna have to push yourself really hard to get your heart rate up that quickly. So I think that's a good guide for what sort of intensity you want to go at. Or, you know, if you want to just look at race paces, like something you can, you know, a threshold intensity, so something you could hold for about an hour. Like for me, like if I can get my heart rate, I typically in the blocks when I do it, which I do it pretty routinely, is that I'm getting my heart rate up to at least marathon pace, if not marathon intensity, if not higher. And I'm running the paces about the pace I could run a half marathon in. And that seems to work quite well. But like you want to get your heart rate up before and give yourself plenty of recovery. In terms of like, I don't know, like I think then it's like I would also still do the strides as well. So like I probably do that after I've done the 4, 5, 6 minute block. So you probably like a lot. It's only adding one more thing to a more traditional warm up. So I probably do 10 minutes of jogging. Then maybe I'll do some drills. I normally don't bother with drills, to be honest. Like I don't know if that's right or wrong. Like I don't think it adds very much, and I don't do drills before my sessions normally, because partly because I can't be bothered, partly because of the time thing. Like yeah, shoot me. Like I probably should be doing them, but I don't know. Maybe that's no argument for another day. But yeah, do my jog, do my 4, 5, 6 minute bout. I'll then recover for 2 minutes. I'll probably jog a little bit because that helps me recover. And then I might get my race shoes on and then do my strides. Because that just psychologically as well, like putting on your race shoes, go, oh, this feels easy now. Like I'm going so much faster. And then finish that 10, 15 minutes before, and then get to the start line. And I also sort of think like, because sometimes you see people doing strides literally like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and 30 seconds before the gun goes, and I think that is going to leave you a bit fatigued. Like, you know, that is going to deplete your anaerobic battery a little bit. And like, but I'm sort of there, like, not being smug, but going, no, I think I'm good. I'm just walking around jogging, and like, I'm not doing like, you know, especially on a road race where you can literally, like, if you're an elite athlete, often they'll give you a 200 meter. You can be warming up on the start line and doing strides and stuff like that. And I typically just jog up and down because I sort of feel like I'm done now. I'm ready to go. And I don't want to put too much fatigue into my system then. Like, yeah, do it 10, 15 minutes before. You can have plenty of time to recover. But if you're doing it a minute before the start line, I don't know. Like, maybe it doesn't make a difference. Or maybe they need that because they haven't primed their body already. But yeah, I guess one thing we can talk about now is actually how it does alter different distances. And we've sort of alluded to that a bit already, like 800 meter runners. Yeah, maybe for an 800 meter runner, it makes sense to do a 200 meters because that's a race that's the intensity they're going to run at. Like we were talking a bit before we started recording, like actually some 800 meter runners aren't running out far in training, so maybe wouldn't feel comfortable, I don't know, doing like a mile at threshold or whatever. And they're recruiting the specific fibers they're going to be using during the race. So yeah, maybe that makes sense. But I think I think for anything longer than that, so 1500 meters, 3K, 5K, 10K, like I would definitely be doing something like 4, 5, 6 minutes of threshold. Then the question becomes about, do you agree with that? I think
yeah. Once you get over that distance, you're probably going to be wanting to think about defending your glycogen stores. So, you know, don't do anything if you're doing a half or a marathon, but you know that is going to affect performance at the end of the race. And if maybe you switch on your VO2 kinetics a bit for the first kilometer of a half marathon, but in the final 3 kilometers you've depleted your muscle glycogen stores. So there is a trade-off at either end of those. And then for the marathon, you don't. I think as well, I don't think it's been mentioned in the research, but they're looking at severe intensity exercise for the actual, the thing that you're trying to prime for. And for a half and a marathon, you shouldn't be in the severe domain. If you're in the severe domain at the start of a marathon, you've got way more issues than your VO2 kinetics.
Yeah. Scott, just for the listeners, just remind them what severe intensity domain is.
Yeah. So although last time we talked about zone 2 and dividing training intensities into 5 or 7 zones, in sort of sports science literature, you generally go with, well, now it's 4, but 3 intensities. So moderate is up to the first lactate threshold. So that's your lay terms, I guess, up to sort of just below marathon pace. And then heavy, heavy is marathon to half marathon pace, basically. So first lactate threshold to second lactate threshold or lactate turn point. And then severe is anything above second lactate threshold. So anything faster than a half marathon pace is severe intensity. So yeah, 10K, 5K is in that severe intensity zone. Yeah, so like I said, if you're going faster than your half marathon pace at the start of a marathon, you've got way more issues coming your way than your VO2 kinetics.
Yeah, if you way above threshold, basically, yeah, you have a few issues. But yeah, I think the priming definitely seems to work for events that are above your second threshold, LT2, lactate turn point, whatever you want to call it, and anything up to, well, you got severe and you got extreme, which is like things that are happening above your VO2 max. But really, we're talking about 400 meters then, and we're not interested in that. Like it's physiology of endurance running. Like 400 meters ain't endurance. Like 800 meters, you can pretend at least it's a bit endurancey. But so that's where the literature definitely says this seems to work. Anything anything above threshold. So 800 meters down to, I think the half marathon for me, it's like a borderline. I think and it depends how good you are. Because if you're running a half marathon in 58 minutes, then that's a pretty hard effort, and I'd probably want to do a pretty hard warm up, because actually they've got to get their VO2 this is where absolute stuff. We're talking about relative. So a threshold is a relative term. Everyone's got a threshold, which is somewhere between if they're talking about LT2, it's going to be somewhere between probably 80 and 90% of max. But if you're running a half marathon 58 minutes, just the absolute amount of oxygen you're getting into your system is pretty high. But you're going to be, but if you're thinking about rest, everyone's going to be pretty similar, about 2.5, 3 liters a minute. But a good runner, someone who's running a half marathon in 90 minutes, they've got to get their VO2 from 3 liters per minute up to, say, this may 40. Well, probably a bit less than that. But probably about it's going to be about. I'm just thinking about the numbers here. If you're running a half marathon in 90 minutes, you've probably got to get your VO2 from 3 liters per minute up to 50 liters a minute ish. And that's not as big a challenge as getting it from where an elite half marathon runner who's running 58 minutes, they're probably going to have to go from 3 liters up to about 65. I've been saying 3, but I mean mil per kilogram per minute. Sorry, not liters per minute. I have to go. So a 90-minute runner is probably going from 3 mil per kilogram per minute up to about 50. Whereas a 58-minute half marathon runner is going to have to go from about 3 mil per kilogram per minute up to about 65-ish. That's quite a lot. That's quite a bigger challenge, and there's going to be more of an oxygen deficit getting up to that. So they probably want to do more of a warm up. But again, the consideration there is, like you've said already, Owain, is actually the more of that intense stuff you do, the more you're going to deplete your glycogen stores. Now, if you're a 58-minute half marathon runner, I'm probably not too worried about that, because they're just going to have their muscles going to be able to pack so much glycogen in because they're just really well trained. They're only running for 58 minutes, so the intensity is a bit higher, so they're going to get through those stores quicker. But I just think the adaptations they've got, I think for a half marathon, for me, unless you're going to be doing it for 2 hours plus, fueling probably isn't too much of an issue. But for a marathon, definitely, I would say I wouldn't be doing a priming thing for a marathon. I do, for me, I would jog for 7 to 10 minutes, and I'm not even doing any strides.
In the marathon, I was going to say as well, it's going to depend on the race setup, and even the half marathon. We're a bit lucky with Cardiff Half, where it's a really nice sort of warm up, even for people not in the elite pen. But I've done London Marathon even out of the Good for Age start, and you're in a banked grass field, and the year I did it was a bit wet, and you're in your super shoes, just in a grass field, and then you go into a pen for half an hour. There's not not necessarily much point in doing much anyway. Like you might as well just sort of stay calm and like save some glycogen stores, I guess.
100%. Yeah, I think the half marathon, the marathon, sorry, you want to make sure you're defending your glycogen stores, so not burning through that too quickly. But but also like it's also such a small portion of a race for start. Like, yeah, if you're primed, you'd have less of an oxygen deficit, but you're not saving your anaerobic capacity, your battery, for later in the race in that scenario. It really doesn't matter. If you use a bit more carbs in the initial 800 meters, well, 800 meters out of the marathon is nothing. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world. But so that's what I would say for a warm up. However, like, I've been in the elite start of London Marathon and seen Kipchoge warm up, and they're doing 30 minutes of running, not that slow. Like, they're jogging at the start, but by the end, they're going some. And he's was the world record holder and is, one of the best of all time. And it's not just him doing it. All of the certainly all the Kenyans are doing that. I think, and maybe the difference is, but again, like 2 hours, like they're running at, if you're running 440 a mile, again, your VO2 is going to have to be up at that 65 mil per kilogram per minute range. So maybe you do want to be a bit more warmed up. But for me, I'm just thinking, surely that's just depleting you a bit. Like, get into, I think if you're starting your race at 440 miles, you probably do need a bit more of a warm up, because it just would feel horrendous just starting off at that pace. Like, for me, like, my marathon pace at PB pace is like 5:10 a mile. But even that, like, I can having done 10 minutes of jogging plus all the adrenaline in your system, like, it's very easy to go run the first mile in 5:10. I'm not finding, this is really hard. And maybe, a couple of miles later, I'm feeling a bit better. But you can also just ease into the marathon, I mean, often my first mile might be slightly slower, but then, like, you just warm into it. I don't think it's an issue. I prefer to go that way around than warming up so much and accidentally running 450 for the first mile, and then you've screwed your race up by mile one. Like, I think, that's what I'd suggest.
So yeah, definitely 5K, for 1500, 5K, 10K, for club runners, it's worth doing, worth trying. I think just thinking in sort of, again, like layman's terms, like, ideally everyone's come into the lab and got tested and wears a heart rate monitor and knows their zones. But if you don't know your zones, you probably just want to be doing this priming at above marathon pace, up to sort of half marathon paces. So that's sort of that hard running where it's you have to think about, the pace you're going, and you are working, but you're not really going for it. So, you're not running at 5K pace before the 5K. A little bit dialed back from that, and like Dan said, 3 to 6 minutes. It's probably a good sort of ballpark. Maybe start out with 3 minutes, and then if you think it works, push it out a bit further. Like Dan said as well, do some jogging before, and then just try this priming. Try it this weekend if you're doing park run. Don't just rock up to park run and then take off the line and then wonder why you feel rubbish. Have a go at priming, because like we said, there's free time to be had, I think, from doing this. For most people, there's going to be some people that won't respond to this, but there's definitely time to be had.
I think it's like one of those easy ones, like putting on a pair of super shoes, 3 seconds, like just changing your warm up slightly. Like, it's not going to make you massively, it's not going to make a huge, you're not going to get 10% faster, but over an 800 meters, that was like 2 to 3 seconds, which is huge. I think I wouldn't expect that much of a change, to be honest. Because the problem with that study in particular is they're not blind. They know exactly what they're doing. Like, they're not blind, and you've got, and that. If you're an athlete in that study, you go, well, they're doing this high intensity warm up because they think it's going to make me run faster, so I'm probably going to run a bit faster here. Like, you can't blind someone to what warm up they're doing; it's impossible. But I would expect a second, maybe over 800, or over a 5K, maybe 5 or 10, maybe 5 seconds, 6, 7 seconds. So it's not going to. It's not. Yeah, go on.
There's a paper that's done this in 5K runners, but I mean, we both had a lot a lot of questions about this paper, but they saw about 6 seconds over 5K, which, you know, problems aside, like, I mean, they said it was significant. We're maybe not going to go down statistical testing today, but
I think
they said it's significant. Whether that's biologically significant and, you know, outside of normally expected sort of differences. But yeah, if you're sitting on, you know, 16:04 for 5K, then maybe you could break 16 by changing your warm up. Like that's the sort of difference it might make. So.
Yeah, I think especially like another thing that's interesting is actually this might help someone who's slightly slower more than someone who's a bit faster, because one of the things that these like there seems to be like a pretty much linear relationship between your VO2 max and how quickly you can turn on your VO2 kinetics. So people who are fitter already turn it on quicker. So those people who are not quite so fit might see a bigger benefit. So, you know, that 800 meter study, they were actually in pretty good athletes. I think they were running about 2 minutes, but they was a bit quicker. I don't know.
I think it was elite athletes.
Was it? So like, yeah, they saw like that much in. Like, again, we've always said some thoughts about study. They weren't blinded, but that's probably impossible to do. But actually, yeah, people who aren't as fit might get more of the benefit. But at the same time, you know, they might see a bigger benefit in most people who are slower. But if you're in the Olympics, like even half a second, a quarter of a second, you know, becomes more and more important. Every second is much more important at the top end, because the margins between people are so much finer. So yeah, I think the most important thing is practice it first, give it a try, and probably give it a few tries. You know, you can't, because it's not that's the thing. Like there's so many other factors going on to a race, like what's your training? Are you fitter or not? What does training look like going into that race? Like, what are the conditions on the day? I think the most important thing is, how did you feel? Like, did you feel better? Could you get off the start line better? Like, you know, if you want to get really analytical, yeah, wear a heart rate monitor and see if your heart rate got up a bit quicker. I wear a heart rate monitor on my races just because I'm a massive nerd and I like to compare the data. But I can understand why some people might not want to do that. But yeah, I think just try adding that piece into your warm up. A 3 to 6 minute bout, half marathon to like 10 mile, 10K pace-ish effort. Don't think about the intensity too much. It probably doesn't matter that much. You just want to do something that's hard. You're going to feel a bit fatigued afterwards. And if you're not feeling a bit fatigued, you probably haven't done enough. Finish it 10 to 15 minutes before your race. Do your race, see how you feel. Let us know.
If you're really concerned about fatigue as well, like, you know, have a gel like straight after sort of thing. Like there's mitigation strategies for that, even if that's just a psychological benefit as much as anything. Like, yeah, have a gel, offset the sort of fatigue you think you're going to be feeling. And yeah, like you said, see how you feel off the start line. See how you feel 2-3 minutes in as well. That might be where you start to feel the effect.
And in the back end of a race, like we said, like especially can you kick at the end? Like, have you got a bit more there? That's a good sign. I think a 5K is a nice distance to practice it in, because that's the sort of area where you're going to see big response. 10K, I'm like, yeah, I would still do it for 10K, but I'm not expecting that's sort of a place where it's going to make the biggest difference. A 5K to 800, I'm thinking, yeah, that's really, really crucial. So go, and a 5K is just nice. You can go do it at a park run and like test it in a no stress, no pressure environment. Like, who cares if you run a few seconds better or worse at park run? That doesn't matter. But like, just pay attention to how you feel. Like, the time is important too. But yeah, go give it a go. See if it makes a difference. Hopefully that's an easy win for you to get a few seconds. Anything else to add?
That's it. I think you got it covered. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up. We were a bit long last time. I think we were over the hour. I think that's a bit much for some people, including me. My brain's fried by the end of that. So not quite sure when we're going to publish this yet, when we'll launch it out. I'm off to the French Alps, not on an altitude training camp, on a family camping trip. So probably not going to be recording them, but we'll get back to you as soon as I'm back from that. So certainly beginning of August, we'll be getting a podcast out again. If there's anything you would like to hear us talk about, let us know. Like, Twitter's probably the best place, do you reckon? Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter,
yeah. I think we're both on Instagram, but like, I'm not a big Instagrammer. send us a message on Twitter, or I think if you're on Spotify, you can put a message at the bottom of the podcast and you can add it in there. We'll keep attention to that. Yeah, have a great week, everybody. Catch you soon.